Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys about the 3 reasons you are not gaining muscle, or you're gaining it much, much slower than you think that you should be. I've already got my +5 out of weaponsmithing on, so let me work on my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about it. All right, reason number 1, you are not trying hard enough to get stronger on the basic barbell exercises, or your big compounds in general. And that's a take home that needs to be understood. I'm not saying isolation movements don't add muscle mass. We've got studies showing that in many cases an isolation movement can put just as much muscle on an individual muscle as a big compound can. So I'm not trying to be anti-isolation here, even though I am somewhat. I'm not trying to be at this point. But even if you wanted to go with the caveat that you feel your isolation movements help tremendously, we also know, anyone who's coached people, that people who don't do a compound movement or a body part that they try to isolate, what do they find? They can't progress after about 6 to 8 weeks. They stall completely on their progression on single joint exercises. Your big compound movements are what put muscle mass on you the most effectively, because they usually work a large number of muscles through the body, and you can train them for years on end and continue to make progress. Without progressive overload, you do not gain muscle. You will not gain muscle without progressive overload unless you are on drugs. And that includes either getting stronger with adding more weight to the bar, being able to add more reps up to a certain threshold helps, adding more volume, but in general you have to be improving workload, and that workload will eventually require you to add weight. It will require you to add weight to the bar. And what people need to grasp too is that even if you go back and you say, well, I still think I need to do these compound movements and that's my problem, well, you might be focusing too much on them instead of getting stronger on the big lifts. But what you need to also understand is that, what do we know when it comes to improving strength on isolation movements? If you look at the data that's been done, we have found that training a compound movement increases strength on isolation movements more than training the isolation movement does. In other words, in studies that have been done where you take one group of people who squat, another group of people who do a leg extension, take a group of people who do some sort of pulling like a lat pull down versus a curl, what they find is that even if muscle mass gains have been similar over several weeks, the person who did the compound movement, when they test their strength on the isolation movement, will usually gain more strength on the isolation movement. In other words, you'll be able to curl more if you got stronger on the lat pull down and didn't do any curls than if you just got stronger on the curls. And that's an interesting piece of data, and it has to do with the fact that compound movements train the nervous system better also. And at the end of the day, even an isolation movement, if you can get stronger at it, and by stronger I mean with good form, being able to actually do the work with the muscle, right? If you get stronger at it, you'll get better muscle gains because you're able to do more work. You're able to generate more workload. Compound movements make you stronger at isolation movements better than training the isolation movements do. Again, data is pretty strong there, but the whole point is that if you're struggling to gain muscle, it could be because you are focusing too much on the minutia instead of improving your strength on the basic exercises. And there is no substitute for that. No substitute for that. And by the basic exercises, I don't just mean the big 3. I'm not talking about the power lifts. I'm talking about your big lifts. Your standing overhead press, your weighted chin-ups, your barbell rows. All right? Weighted dips. All these big compound movements have the potential to put a lot of muscle on you. And I mean, truth be told, you guys who are struggling with upper body development, do you really think getting really strong on weighted chin-ups, weighted dips, overhead pressing, rows is not going to make your upper body bigger? Right? You ever met anyone who can do weighted chin-ups and weighted dips with 100 plus extra pounds for reps with good form and full range of motion, who doesn't have relatively big arms, chest, back? Of course not. Of course not. So I'm not just talking about the squat, bench, and the deadlift, although getting stronger at the squat, bench, and deadlift, particularly the squat and the bench press, will still put a lot of muscle on you. Will put a lot of muscle on you. I would never obviously tell you that that's all you need to do, though. And therein lies the difference. But you've got to get stronger at the basic lifts. Number two, you're not eating enough food. You're not eating enough food. Too many guys get too caught up in trying to maintain razor sharp abs and stay lean and ripped year round without understanding that that's the reason they're not getting bigger. And that's okay, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. In other words, if you're not willing to bulk up a little bit, you're not willing to put down enough food and enough nutrition to fuel your workouts, grow new muscle tissue, put your body in an anabolic state, even through hormonal environment, to ensure that you give all the nutrients that you need for additional recovery, and you're not going to get that from a multivitamin. If you're not doing this, you have to accept the fact that you're not going to get any bigger. In other words, if you're insistent upon trying to stay really ripped year round, you're going to have to accept that you're probably not going to grow. And in many cases, you're going to lose muscle as a result of doing that. It's very difficult in some cases to even hold on to the muscle you have at a really low body fat. It can be done, but you have to know what you're doing. Not everyone has the knowledge to do that. You might not. It's going to take time. But by that same token, you need to remember what Arnold said. You can't, and I hate to quote bodybuilders, this isn't a bodybuilding channel, but he said you can't chisel a pebble. At a certain point, you're going to have to be willing to gain a little body fat, because eating enough to gain a little bit of body fat is extremely anabolic. And in the long term, you're going to end up with more muscle mass as a result of it if you're careful about it. Now, I'm not telling you to knock down 6 double bacon cheeseburgers every day and get a big fat gut. That's not what I'm saying. But you do need to be gaining weight progressively. In other words, if you're 155 pounds at 5'9", the reason you're not gaining muscle is because you're not eating enough to get to 160. You're not eating enough to get to 165. You're not eating enough to get to 175. And you probably need to do that. And if you don't, then don't complain because you're staying small. You probably need to be getting better nutrition. Better nutrition fuels workouts, it fuels muscle growth, fuels anabolic hormones in the body, fuels your recovery. It's important, and if you're not doing it, you're not getting enough nutrition in to grow. You can't expect to grow. It is not going to happen. You're not supplying the fuel or the building blocks to produce new muscle tissue. And again, it's this whole anorexic mindset people have, and they don't understand that the guys who they see who are already big and ripped are, number one, possibly using drugs to maintain that state, and they might be using a lot more than you think. Number two, they've probably already spent years bulking up. I know plenty of guys out there who people think have amazing physiques who have been up at 15, 18% body fat at different points a few years ago. They were willing to do that to put on the muscle. That's the price they had to pay. It's a long-term process. Number three, you're probably not getting enough sleep. You're not getting enough sleep. Now, I have no problem with people coming in and training really hard and doing a lot of work. When people use this thing of, well, recovery is important too, you need to understand recovery is important. That doesn't mean that you can't come in and do a lot of work, because most of you probably are not overtraining. In fact, most people probably don't train hard enough. And I'm the first person to talk about needing deloads and everything else. But again, going back to point one, guys who are sitting around worried about too much recovery probably aren't getting enough sleep. Again, if you're not adding weight to the bar continually on big barbell movements like squats, deadlifts, things like that, you're probably not in danger of overtraining. Again, if you're squatting only once or twice a week and you're still under 200 pounds, odds are you're not capable of producing enough work capacity in the gym to really overtrain. You might get some overuse injuries from doing too much isolation fluff or grinding out forced reps with bad form, but your actual workloads probably are not that high. But if you're not sleeping, you're not growing. That is when you gain the majority of the muscle tissue that you're going to gain, is when you're sleeping. If you're not getting at least 8 hours of sleep every night, maybe you party too much on the weekends, you sit up playing video games too late and only get 5 hours of sleep sometimes, don't expect to gain muscle that week. because you're going to shortchange yourself, because you have a recovery process that has to occur after you train before you gain muscle, and you have a limited window. In other words, if you have a productive workout and you do stimulate some new muscle growth and you only get 5 hours of sleep that night because you stayed up late, you watched too much TV, play too many video games, stay on your phone late, instead of focusing on getting 8 hours of quality sleep, that workout was very possibly completely wasted. Completely wasted. You need sleep to grow. And for most of you, that means at least 8 hours every night in a dark room with no lights on, no night lights, no TV playing, a cool, dark room. That's what you need. That's what's going to give you the most growth, the most recovery. And an unadded fourth, you're just going to have to be patient. Like with all those other things, it's going to take patience. See, a lot of guys are like, well, I've gotten stronger on my bench. I've gotten stronger on my squat. I haven't gained that much muscle. But it's like over 6 months, and how much did you put on there? 30 pounds. You bench 200 pounds for 5 reps. That's a good start. You squat 300 for 3 reps. That's a good start. Keep adding weight to the bar. Keep doing it for another 2 or 3 years. Get your bench up to 300. Get your squat up to 400. Get your weighted chin-ups up to where you can do them with a dead hang with 50 pounds. Get your overhead press up to 185, 190. All right? Do these things and you'll stack more muscle on. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither are large muscles. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative. Go check out my Patreon site if you haven't yet. That's where I put up some unique content. It's over in the About tab. I started one a few days ago. I'm more likely to answer your questions there directly of any nature, including topics that may not be covered on YouTube. So go check it out. So I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.